In the bleak landscape of Romania, where heavy mists conceal ancient secrets, a man named Victor found himself on the edge of the abyss. He had lost his family in a tragic car accident on the roads of Brasov, and the pain that consumed him was unbearable. Life, which once pulsed vibrantly around him, had now become a distant echo of laughter and shattered dreams. In his desperate search for relief, Victor considered the only way out, the final act that would end his agony. However, amid this darkness, a malignantly seductive presence began to torment him, an entity that fed on his despair and pain. As he wandered the deserted streets of a neighborhood in Sibiu, Victor felt the chill of the night penetrate his bones. The shadows seemed to dance around him, whispering promises of a relief that would never come. With each step, the voice of the evil being grew clearer, urging him to give in to his pain and surrender to the approaching tortures. In his mind, the torment mixed with distorted visions of his family, as if they were always on the brink of an abyss, calling him to join them. Despair was a raging sea, and Victor found himself trapped in its relentless waves. In a moment of weakness, he allowed himself to listen to the voice that called him, and in doing so, he was swallowed by an endless nightmare. The entity led him to a world of psychological torture, where his failures were exposed at every dark corner. Victor found himself confronted with his decisions, his fears, and his shortcomings. With each torment, with each anguish, hope faded even further. Yet, amid the despair, a small flame of resistance began to shine within him. It was the memory of the happy moments he spent with his family, a reminder that even amid pain, there was a light that could not be extinguished. The internal dilemma intensified. Should he succumb to the call of evil or fight to escape the clutches of darkness? Thus, Victor's battle was not only against the entity, but also against his own soul. Could he find the strength needed to face his demons and finally break free from the chains that bound him to a dark fate? The tortures were intense, but the possibility of redemption still lingered in the air, like a thin thread of hope in a world filled with shadows. Victor walked through the streets of Sibiu, surrounded by a dense fog that seemed to have a life of its own. With each step, the malignant presence grew stronger, as if it were feeding on his despair. The whispers that had once been soft now transformed into deafening screams echoing in his mind. He stopped in front of an old mansion, its broken windows resembling empty eyes watching him. Something inside him urged him to enter. He didn't know if it was curiosity or a suicidal impulse, but the need to understand what was happening led him to cross the threshold of the door. As soon as he entered, a chill ran down his spine. The interior of the mansion was shrouded in darkness, except for a faint light emanating from the end of a hallway. As Victor walked, he began to feel the presence of the entity drawing closer, as if it were waiting for him there. Amid the decay and abandonment, echoes of childish laughter and family conversations began to fill the space, but they were distorted, like a poisoned memory. He wondered if he was truly losing his sanity, or if something more sinister was at play. It was then that he heard a familiar whisper, "Victor?" The voice paralyzed him. It was Clara, his wife, but something was wrong. The way she pronounced his name was laden with pain and despair. He followed the voice, each step more hesitant than the last. At the end of the hallway, he found a slightly ajar door, from which a warm, almost inviting light emanated. Pushing it open, Victor came face to face with a room filled with photographs of his past life, moments that had been captured with love and joy. But as he looked closer, the images began to change. The faces of his family were replaced by expressions of suffering and fear. A shrill laugh echoed behind him, and Victor turned to find a hooded figure, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red. "You cannot escape, Victor. They are here, and you belong to this place too." The figure seemed to feed off his terror, and he felt the hope that had begun to blossom in his heart being stifled once again. In that moment of desperation, a bright light illuminated the corner of the room, revealing a woman with long, unkempt hair, dressed in a white gown that floated around her. She had the same expression of sorrow that Victor felt, but there was something powerful in her gaze. "Victor, you must fight. This entity feeds on your pain. Do not let it win." The woman seemed familiar, like someone he knew from a distant time, but he couldn't identify her. The malignant presence drew closer, and Victor felt the pressure in his chest intensify. He realized he was in a deadly game, where the entity was trying to convince him to give up his fight. The shadows around him danced with rage, and the air grew heavier. He needed to choose: give in to the darkness or seek the strength that still remained within him. The woman seemed to understand his dilemma. "Remember what you love, Victor. They will always be with you, even in the darkness." Suddenly, memories of happy moments began to flood his mind. The laughter of his daughter, the playtime at the park, the warm embraces from Clara, and so, amid the chaos, the flame of his resistance began to ignite, challenging the entity that threatened to devour him. The conflict was just beginning, and Victor knew that the battle for his soul would be intense and relentless. Victor felt the tension rise as the hooded figure approached, its presence becoming increasingly oppressive. He focused on the woman in the white dress, his only hope amidst the darkness. But when she opened her mouth to speak, a piercing scream echoed through the room, interrupting her words. The malevolent entity seemed to revel in the agony it caused, and Victor began to doubt the reality around him. The room started to spin, the walls warping as if the mansion itself were alive and feeding off his fear. In that moment of confusion, a new revelation presented itself to him. The woman in white, who had once seemed like an ally, began to shift form. Her distorted face and the eyes that once exuded compassion were now filled with deep malevolence. "You really think you can escape, Victor?" Her voice echoed with a mocking tone. "I am part of you. The pain you feel is what binds us." The truth hit Victor like a blow. The entity was not just an external being, but a manifestation of his own pain and regrets. He remembered the sleepless nights, the unspoken words, the guilt that had consumed him since the loss of his family. The malignant presence had fed off his traumas, growing stronger with each moment of weakness. "You cannot fight against yourself," the voice resonated, and Victor felt his sanity slip through his fingers. Despair threatened to overwhelm him, and he questioned whether he was truly there in the mansion or if it was all just a delusion born from his own suffering. But deep down, a small flame of determination still burned. He remembered the laughter, the hugs, the light his family brought to his life. "No, you do not belong in this place," he shouted, trying to reconnect with the only strength he had left. But the hooded figure merely laughed, a laughter that reverberated within him, as if it were feeding off his resistance. At that moment, the room began to transform once again. The photographs on the walls became dancing shadows, distorting into visions of his family in horror and despair. He saw Clara, his wife, being consumed by darkness, and his daughter desperate, reaching out for help. Victor's anguish intensified. He realized that the entity was not only attacking him, but everything he loved. The battle was not just for his soul, but for his memories, for his family. The terror was now palpable, and Victor understood that the real fight was just beginning. He felt trapped in a cycle of pain and loss, a labyrinth of guilt from which he could not escape. The entity, now more powerful than ever, revealed that Victor's greatest enemy was himself, and the weight of that knowledge nearly brought him down. But amidst the chaos, a decision formed in his mind. He would not fight only for himself, but for the memories that still shone in his heart. He had to find a way to face this part of himself, no matter how terrifying it was. And so the battle for his soul would become a journey of self-acceptance, where light and darkness would meet in a definitive confrontation. Victor took a deep breath, feeling the pressure of the entity grow around him. The room, now a distorted nightmare, seemed to pulse with the energy of his darkest memories. He faced the hooded figure, which approached with a sinister smile, as if ready to devour his essence. "You cannot escape," the hissing voice echoed, mingling with the echoes of his most painful memories. But instead of backing down, Victor stood his ground. The eyes of his wife and daughter danced in his mind, like beacons in the darkness. He was not fighting just for himself, but for every laugh, every hug, every moment that the entity tried to erase. "I am not you," he proclaimed, his voice gaining strength. "You are just a shadow of my pain, and I will not let you dominate me." The hooded figure hesitated, confidence wavering. Victor lunged forward, the connection to his memories strengthening with each step. He reached out his hands not to attack, but to reclaim what was his. "Clara, Sophia," he shouted, calling his memories to life. The room trembled, and the shadows on the walls began to glow with the light of happy moments. The laughter of his daughter echoed, and the warmth of his wife's love enveloped him like a protective cloak. The entity, now visibly disturbed, tried to contract, its dark body writhing in desperation. "You cannot change the past. I am your truth," it screamed. But Victor would not be shaken. "You are just the pain I allowed to grow." He felt the energy vibrate within him, a wave of pure light that began to break through the darkness. With a cry of determination, he moved forward. The memories of joy and love flooded the space, and the hooded figure began to fade. "I choose to remember," Victor declared, and the light of his memories burst into a wave of heat and color. The room illuminated, the walls vibrating as the entity writhed, consumed by the very darkness it had tried to impose on him. Victor felt the pressure dissipate, a deep relief enveloping him. The malevolent figure disappeared with a scream of agony as the shadows turned to light, revealing the smiling faces of his family. He fell to his knees, tears of relief streaming down his face. He had faced the darkness within him, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his life, his memories, and finally, the peace he had long sought. The mansion, once oppressive, now seemed to breathe in harmony. as if finally freed from an ancient burden. Now, he knew he was not alone. The light of Clara and Sophia would always be with him, and the internal battle had brought the understanding that love and pain coexist, but he would always choose the former. Victor raised his head, panting, as the light of memories still illuminated the now transformed room. The walls, once oppressive and dark, now shone with a welcoming aura, but he felt that the battle fought would not leave him unscathed. The scars that marked his body and soul were a constant reminder of what he had faced, what he had lost, and what could still return. He stood up, his legs trembling under the weight of adrenaline and pain. The echo of the entity's scream still resonated in his mind, a reminder of the terror that had almost consumed him. As he looked around, he noticed that some objects in the room still moved slightly, as if the residual energy of the entity was trapped in the space, waiting for a new opportunity to manifest. A feeling of unease settled in his chest. The presence of Clara and Sophia, although comforting, did not erase the feeling that darkness could return, perhaps in an even more insidious form. He knew that despite having won that battle, the internal conflict was far from resolved. The memories of his family were now more alive than ever, but the pain of loss still accompanied him, like a shadow that refused to disappear completely. As he walked out of the mansion, the daylight penetrated the darkness that had once dominated that place. The sun shone, but Victor could not shake the feeling that something had changed within him. The scars were not just physical, they were etched in his soul, a constant reminder of what he had faced. He looked to the horizon, feeling a mix of hope and melancholy, knowing that his family's love would always be with him, but that the memories could not be undone. The truth about the entity had been revealed, but questions still lingered in the air. What had that force truly been? Did darkness really have an end, or had he merely managed to tame it temporarily? The thought that danger could return one day haunted him. He moved away from the mansion, but felt that the fight was not yet over. The feeling of being watched accompanied him, a reminder that the world was not as simple as it seemed. Victor committed to living with his scars, to honoring the memory of Clara and Sophia in every step he took. He knew that the light he had found in his memories would be his guide, but the darkness, though momentarily kept at bay, could always be lurking, ready to return. In his heart, he carried the certainty that the true battle was the daily choice between light and shadow, and that choice he was determined to make, no matter the cost. As Victor left the mansion, he felt a familiar presence, yet at the same time oppressive. The sunlight could not completely dissipate the darkness that resided within him. He had already faced the entity, but he knew that the struggle inside him still endured.